April 8, 1943. The air over Caen, France was a crystalline, wind-swept void nearly 5 miles above the contested Earth. At 27,000 feet, the cold was absolute, but inside the cramped, oxygen-fed cockpit of his Focke-Wulf FW190A5, Oberleutnant Ralph Hermaken's blood ran hot with the anticipation of an easy kill. The veteran ace of Jagdgeschwader 26, Fighter Wing 26, 26 years old and hardened by 3 years of continuous fighting from Poland to the Russian steppes, couldn't suppress a smirk that stretched his oxygen mask. He watched the silhouettes rising laboriously toward his formation, clumsy shapes climbing through the clear sapphire canopy, and transmitted a burst of clipped laughter to his wingman. Die Amis haben uns fliegende Milchkannen geschickt, he joked, his voice crackling with derision. The Americans have sent us flying milk bottles. Below them, 16 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group lumbered upward in tight formation. The planes were a spectacle of engineering excess, a massive, imposing contradiction to the sleek, lightweight interceptors the Luftwaffe had perfected. Their 2,000-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double WASP 18-cylinder radial engines strained against an all-up weight of nearly 7 tons. To the German pilots, accustomed to the nimble Spitfires and the viciously quick Messerschmitts, these corpulent American machines appeared almost comical. They were barrel-shaped fuselages topped with vast bubble-like greenhouse canopies. Their wings seemed disproportionately small for their massive bodies, and their propellers, the enormous 4-bladed Curtiss electric units, dwarfed anything in the Luftwaffe inventory. The P-47 did not look like a fighter. It looked like a compromise, a pregnant cow strapped to an overly large engine. What Hermaken and his comrades, circling like confident wolves above, could not possibly have known, what their ingrained philosophy of aerial combat prevented them from imagining, was that they were witnessing the arrival of the weapon that would systematically destroy the Luftwaffe's fighter arm. The aircraft they derided as flying milk bottles would, within 18 months, transform from an object of derision into an instrument of terror, its 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns becoming the most feared sound in German skies. The grim, undeniable mathematics of destruction were already loaded in those broad, thick wings. 3,400 rounds of ammunition, a combined rate of fire of 6,000 rounds per minute. Enough concentrated high-velocity firepower to literally saw a Messerschmitt in half in less than 2 seconds. The immediate objective of the P-47 was to serve as a high-altitude interceptor, capable of matching or exceeding the performance of the latest German aircraft. Yet its philosophical genesis lay in a moment of sheer panic. The Luftwaffe's stunning sweep across France in May and June of 1940 sent shockwaves through the American defense establishment. Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's Georgian-born chief designer, received urgent, uncompromising specifications from the U.S. Army Air Force, USAAF. They needed a high-altitude fighter capable of besting the Luftwaffe's best, and they needed it yesterday. Kartveli, a man who believed power was the ultimate arbiter of performance, responded by designing not an interceptor, but a monster, a colossal machine that redefined the very concept of a single-seat fighter. It will be a dinosaur, Kartveli reportedly admitted to his design team, but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions. The XP-47B prototype, which first flew on May 6, 1941, shocked everyone who saw it. At an empty weight of 9,900 pounds, it weighed 65% more than its direct predecessor, the P-43 Lancer. The core of this incredible mass was the engine and the massive turbo-supercharger system, a complex series of ducts and intercoolers that snaked through the entire rear fuselage, giving the aircraft an almost pregnant, heavy appearance. Test pilots approaching the behemoth for the first time invariably asked the same question, a mix of skepticism and awe. This thing actually flies? Not only did it fly, but it flew like nothing else at altitude. The 18-cylinder radial engine, a marvel of American engineering, could maintain its full 2,000 horsepower rating up to 27,000 feet, a height where the liquid-cooled engines of the Messerschmitt Bf-109 and Focke-Wulf 190 gasped for air and saw their performance severely degrade. The turbo supercharger, fed by exhaust gases, delivered sea-level atmospheric pressure to the engine's carburetor in the thin air of the stratosphere, providing a critical operational edge that would prove decisive in the high-altitude escort missions to come. Yet its brute strength came at a brutal cost in handling. Major Hubert "Hub" Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group, the first P-47 operational unit, initially despised the aircraft. His unit, training at Bridgeport, Connecticut, lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training accidents between September 1942 and January 1943. The P-47, Zemke famously noted, killed more Americans in training than Germans would in the first months of combat. It ground-looped savagely on landing, torque-rolled violently on takeoff, and, most alarmingly, could enter a high-speed dive with such enthusiasm that novice pilots discovered the terrifying phenomenon of compressibility, where shock waves formed on the wings and the controls simply froze. But those who survived the steep learning curve discovered something extraordinary. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma who would become one of America's top aces with 27 victories, described his first flight with visceral clarity. It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it, you aimed it. The aircraft, for all its clumsiness, had a potential that was waiting to be unlocked. The first combat encounters in April and May 1943, however, confirmed every German prejudice. The heavy P-47s could not turn with the Focke-Wulf 190s, could not climb with the Messerschmitt 109s, and couldn't match their nimble handling at medium altitudes. Luftwaffe pilots quickly developed predictable tactics to exploit these weaknesses, attacking from below where the heavy Thunderbolts struggled, forcing them into turning fights where agility mattered more than sheer firepower. Hauptmann Josef Pips Priller, commanding officer of Jagdgeschwader 26, reported to headquarters after his first encounter, "The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. Our boys are calling them Indians, fat targets pretending to be warriors." The statistics seemed to confirm German confidence. In their first month of operations, the American fighter groups lost 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed German kills. The Royal Air Force, RAF, observing from their Spitfire squadrons, quietly suggested the Americans might reconsider their choice of mount. British pilots joked that the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was simply to unstrap and run around the roomy cockpit. Yet, a silent, crucial factor was being missed by German intelligence. The P-47s that were shot down had absorbed an incredible, unprecedented amount of punishment before falling. Damage that would have disintegrated a Messerschmitt or a Spitfire was often shruggingly ignored by the huge radial-engined American fighter. This flying milk bottle had a hidden weapon: the ability to survive. Something strange and deeply disturbing to the principles of aerial warfare was happening in those early encounters that German intelligence consistently failed to notice. The P-47s that were surviving the initial skirmishes, those that limped back across the English Channel, had absorbed incredible, almost unbelievable punishment before falling. One aircraft returned from a May 4th mission with 21 20mm cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes, damage that would have disintegrated a Messerschmitt or a Spitfire. The massive air-cooled Pratt & Whitney radial engine, lacking vulnerable coolant systems, simply shrugged off hits that would have instantly stopped a liquid-cooled fighter cold. The Thunderbolt was proving that survival, not speed or maneuverability, was its most profound, silent weapon. More significantly, when P-47s did manage to align their guns on target, the results were instantaneous and catastrophic. The Thunderbolt's 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns created a zone of concentrated destruction that German pilots had never experienced. Unlike the rifle-caliber weapons of early warfighters or the cannon with limited ammunition, the American fighter could maintain sustained high-volume fire for over 30 seconds, an eternity in aerial combat. The damage tolerance of German aircraft was simply not built to withstand this deluge of heavy, high-velocity ordnance. The event that would fundamentally begin changing German perceptions, forcing a grudging and fearful re-evaluation, occurred on June 26, 1943, over Lazo, France. It involved 2nd Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron, and an encounter that would become legendary on both sides of the conflict. Johnson's formation of 48 P-47s was returning from an escort duty when they were suddenly bounced by 16 Focke-Wulf FW-190s from two Jagdgeschwader 26, led by Hauptmann Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, the younger brother of the famous General Adolf Galland. The Germans executed a perfect textbook attack, diving from the sun with a massive speed advantage, tearing through the American formation. Johnson's Thunderbolt was flying at the rear and was immediately caught in the crossfire of multiple attackers, taking catastrophic damage in the first seconds of combat. Two 20mm cannon shells exploded across his aircraft. The canopy shattered into a blizzard of perspex shards. Hydraulic fluid sprayed a blinding, oily mist into the cockpit. The engine cowling was torn away, and fire erupted behind the instrument panel. Johnson, wounded in the nose and leg by shrapnel and bullet fragments, tried frantically to bail out, but discovered the canopy was jammed. A 20mm shell had exploded directly in the canopy track, effectively welding it shut. He was trapped, wounded, and burning in a dying aircraft at 27,000 feet. What happened next defied every assumption about combat damage tolerance. Despite having almost no forward visibility through the oil-covered windscreen, a barely functioning engine that shook so violently the instrument panel was a blur, and flight controls that responded only intermittently, Johnson managed to level the aircraft and point its massive nose vaguely toward England. The P-47 continued flying with damage that would have instantly reduced any other fighter in existence to falling debris. Then, the situation became worse. A lone Focke-Wulf 190, flown by an unknown pilot from 2/JG-26, discovered the crippled Thunderbolt limping toward the English Channel at less than 170 miles per hour. Historical research has never definitively identified this pilot, though several names have been proposed based on German combat reports from that day. What followed was one of the most extraordinary, one-sided encounters in aerial warfare history. The German pilot, seeing an easy kill, positioned himself behind Johnson's P-47 and opened fire with his full battery of 4 20mm cannon and 2 13mm machine guns. Johnson, unable to evade due to the frozen controls and low speed, could only huddle behind his armored seat plate and pray. The Thunderbolt absorbed the Germans' entire cannon ammunition load. The fuselage and wings were visibly shredded, more holes appearing where already existing holes were. The German repositioned and fired again, this time with only his machine guns, the cannon ammunition exhausted. Finally, the German pilot pulled alongside, staring in utter disbelief at the flying wreck. Johnson could see his face clearly, young, blonde, his expression shifting from confident focus to confusion, and then to something approaching genuine fear. The German repositioned one last time and emptied his remaining machine gun ammunition into the Thunderbolt. Still, it flew. The Focke-Wulf pilot pulled alongside once more, shook his head in apparent amazement, gave an informal, almost respectful salute, and peeled away, presumably out of ammunition and completely bewildered.
Johnson's P-47 somehow made it to RAF Manston, crash landing with its engine failing on the runway. The crew chief, inspecting the wreckage, stopped counting bullet holes after reaching 200. Engineers studying the aircraft discovered a nightmare of impossible survival. One cannon shell had exploded inches from Johnson's head. Another had detonated against the thick armor plate behind his seat, and the main control cables were partially severed. Crucially, 3 of the 4 main longerons, the structural backbone of the fuselage, were shot through. Yet, the rugged, overbuilt aircraft had brought its pilot home. The survival of Johnson's aircraft sent shockwaves through both air forces. American engineers studying the wreckage realized that in building their dinosaur, they had created a margin of safety and durability far beyond their own initial estimates. German intelligence, receiving the combat reports from 2nd Section of Jagdgeschwader 26, initially refused to believe the incredible story. No aircraft could absorb that much punishment, the analysts insisted. But testimony from multiple pilots confirmed the impossible. The P-47 Thunderbolt had taken everything the Luftwaffe's best fighter could deliver, and it had survived, forcing the German pilots to question everything they thought they knew about their enemy's equipment. This revelation of durability would serve as the foundation upon which the Americans, led by men like Hubert Zemke and Robert Johnson, would build a devastating new aerial doctrine. They now knew the Thunderbolt could take the hits. The next step was learning how to dish them out. By July 1943, the American pilots were finally learning to exploit the P-47's true, monstrous strengths. The initial doctrine of attempting to dogfight with the nimble Focke-Wulf 190s, a tactic that favored the Germans, was brutally discarded. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert "Hub" Zemke, the commander of the 56th Fighter Group, was the architect of this tactical revolution, having discovered the secret through brutal trial and error. His new order was simple and absolute. Don't turn with them. Don't climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns. The Thunderbolt's massive weight, initially perceived as a crippling disadvantage, became its most potent weapon. In a dive, nothing could catch it. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 could reach speeds approaching 550 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter could achieve, even in a vertical plunge. This raw kinetic energy could then be converted back into altitude in a high-speed zoom climb that left any pursuing German fighters helplessly behind. Captain Walker Bud Mahurin, who would soon become one of the first American aces in the European theater, refined this concept into what became known as the boom and zoom tactic. Pilots, with characteristic bluntness, often called it the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. Instead of engaging in traditional, slow-motion turning dogfights, the P-47 formations would use their turbo-supercharged advantage to climb to 30,000 feet, an altitude where German fighters operated sluggishly. When Luftwaffe fighters appeared below, usually while positioning to attack the bomber streams, the Thunderbolts would roll inverted and dive, reaching speeds that made deflection shooting almost impossible for the defending Germans. At the bottom of these dives, the American heavy machine guns would speak. German pilots who survived these encounters described it as flying into a wall of lead. The combined synchronized firepower of the 8.50 caliber guns created an impenetrable zone of destruction. Aircraft caught in this convergence pattern didn't just fall. They disintegrated. The true revelation of American firepower came during the August 17, 1943 dual raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg, the deepest penetration into Germany attempted to that date. This mission, a bloody ordeal for the B-17 bombers, would demonstrate the P-47's terrifying effectiveness when employed properly.
Major David Schilling, leading the 62nd Fighter Squadron, encountered a formation of Messerschmitt Me-110 Zerstorer destroyer aircraft, positioning to attack the B-17s with their heavy cannon and rocket armament. These twin-engine German fighters, heavily armed but less maneuverable, were the Luftwaffe's specialized bomber killers. Schilling's flight of 4 Thunderbolts rolled into their attack dive from 28,000 feet. Unteroffizier Hinrich Roth, a rear gunner in one of the Me-100s and 10s who survived the attack, later recounted his experience in a post-war interrogation. The American fighters came down like hammers from heaven. I opened fire at 800 meters. Good hits. I saw them strike the fighter's wing. The P-47 didn't even wobble. Then he fired. The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart. Not shot down, destroyed. Wings separated from the fuselage, the tail severed, the crew compartment shredded into metal confetti. In 2 seconds, an Me-110 became nothing. 8 Me-100s, 10s were destroyed in less than a minute. The German pilots had never experienced such concentrated firepower. Each P-47 carried 425 rounds per gun, making for 3,400 rounds total, weighing nearly 900 pounds. At the typical convergence distance of 300 yards, all 8 guns' ballistic paths intersected in a zone roughly 6 feet in diameter. Anything in that zone faced over 100.50-inch projectiles per second, each traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The sheer volume of fire was a revelation of American industrial capacity. While German fighters struggled with limited cannon ammunition, typically 120 to 200 rounds for a 20-millimeter weapon, American pilots could maintain fire for over half a minute, allowing them to correct errors and ensure a complete kill. The Standard Combat Load Mixed Armor-Piercing Incendiary, API, Armor-Piercing Incendiary Tracer, APIT, and standard ball ammunition in patterns designed to both destroy structural integrity and ignite fuel tanks. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski, who would become the top American ace in Europe with 28 victories, described the effect clinically. When you hit them with all 8, they don't just go down, they explode. I saw a Messerschmitt 109 literally cut in half, the tail falling one way, the nose and wings another. The pilot never knew what hit him. The heavy machine gun, previously considered insufficient against armored fighters, had been transformed by American industrial logic into the ultimate killing instrument through sheer density of fire. The tactical brilliance of the German aces was beginning to crack under the overwhelming material superiority of the Thunderbolt. By September 1943, the Luftwaffe was discovering another horrifying reality about the P-47 that went beyond mere firepower. Its performance improved dramatically with altitude, while German fighters suffered significantly. The massive turbo-supercharged double Wasp engine maintained its rated power output up to 30,000 feet, enabling the Thunderbolt to operate effectively in the thin air of the stratosphere. German fighters, relying on single-stage or two-stage mechanical superchargers, saw their performance degrade significantly above 25,000 feet, making them slow, sluggish, and dangerously unresponsive at the bomber escort altitude. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most successful aces with 206 victories, encountered this reality fatally on October 8, 1943. Leading Jagdgeschwader 1 against a B-17 formation at 28,000 feet over Bremen, Philipp found his Focke-Wulf 190A6 sluggish and unresponsive in the cold, thin air. The powerful BMW 801 engine, so devastating at medium altitudes, was literally gasping for oxygen, nearly 6 miles above the Earth. When P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group dove on his formation from 32,000 feet, an altitude the Germans could not effectively patrol, the Luftwaffe fighters were sitting ducks, unable to accelerate or turn quickly enough to evade the attack. Robert Johnson, now an experienced combat pilot on his way to ace status, was flying at 31,000 feet when he spotted Philipp's distinctive Focke-Wulf with its elaborate nose art. Johnson's combat report was clinical, detached from the legend of the man he was engaging. Open fire at 300 yards, 30-degree deflection. Observe strikes along the entire fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute observed. Philip's death sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. If one of their best, a man who had survived over 500 combat missions on both eastern and western fronts, could not survive against the Thunderbolts, what chance did the average pilot have? The German High Command ordered an immediate investigation into the P-47's capabilities. The report delivered to Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring in November 1943 was sobering. It confirmed that the Thunderbolt's service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet, higher than any German fighter could reach. Its dive speed approached the sound barrier. Its armor included a 3/8-inch steel plate behind the pilot, 1/2-inch bulletproof glass windscreen, and armored deflection plates around the engine. Most disturbingly, its rugged construction allowed it to absorb damage that would destroy 3 conventional fighters and still return home. The report concluded that the P-47, initially dismissed as a failure, was actually superior to all current German interceptors above 25,000 feet. The Americans did not rest on their laurels. In January 1944, a new variant of the P-47 began arriving in England that would complete the transformation from laughingstock to nightmare. The P-47 D-22 featured a Hamilton Standard hydromatic propeller with massive paddle blades 13 feet in diameter. These broad-chord blades bit into the air like enormous oars, and the improvement in climb rate was immediate and dramatic. Where earlier Thunderbolts had climbed at an anemic 2,200 feet per minute at sea level, the paddle blade variants could achieve 3,000 feet per minute, matching or exceeding German fighters at most altitudes. Hauptmann Heinz Knoke of Jagdgeschwader 11, a veteran with over 200 combat missions, encountered the new variants in February 1944 during a bomber interception near Hanover. He wrote in his combat diary, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We bounced a formation near Hanover, expecting our usual advantage. They turned into us and climbed with us. When we tried to disengage, they followed us up to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and blown apart. Nothing left but smoke and fragments. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year." The massive paddle blade propeller did more than improve performance. It changed the very sound of the Thunderbolt. The distinctive thundering roar created by the blade tips reaching near supersonic speeds could be heard from miles away. German ground troops began reporting they could identify approaching P-47s by sound alone, a deep, threatening rumble that meant death from above. They began calling it Donnerschlag, or thunderclap. By March 1944, P-47s, now equipped with external drop tanks, could escort bombers deep into Germany. The short-legged fighter was dead. The long-range juggernaut had arrived, ready to fight the Luftwaffe on its own doorstep. By March 1944, the P-47 equipped with external fuel tanks could finally escort the heavy bombers deep into the heart of the Reich. However, as the long-range P-51 Mustang arrived in greater numbers to take over the deepest escort duties in the spring of 1944, the Thunderbolt units increasingly focused on ground attack, a role that would ultimately make them the most feared aircraft in the German arsenal. The transition began in earnest in April 1944 as the Allies prepared for the invasion of France. The Thunderbolt's sheer weight and durability, which made it a tank in the air, translated perfectly to a low-altitude attack role. Its 8.50 caliber machine guns proved equally devastating against ground targets. The standard armor-piercing incendiary, API ammunition, could penetrate the top armor of most German vehicles, while the sheer volume of fire could destroy soft targets in seconds. A 2-second burst put 160 half-inch projectiles into a target area the size of a truck. But it was the addition of bombs and rockets that truly transformed the P-47 into a deadly multi-role monster. The D-25 variant could carry 2 1,000-pound bombs under the wings and a 500-pound bomb under the fuselage. a bomb load equal to that of early war medium bombers. Later variants added zero-length rocket stubs for 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, HVARs, each equivalent to a 105mm artillery shell. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign, experienced P-47 ground attacks firsthand. His reports captured the sheer terror the Yabos, fighter bombers, instilled. They came in low, so low you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying. Engines roaring, rockets screaming, then the hammer of those heavy machine guns. A column of our trucks simply ceased to exist. 20 vehicles transformed into burning wreckage in one pass. The psychological effect on the men was devastating. We called them Yabos, but these were something beyond that. They were flying artillery with the accuracy of snipers. On June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe discovered how completely the balance of power had shifted. Over 500 P-47s provided air cover for the invasion, creating an impenetrable umbrella over the beaches. German fighters attempting to reach the landing zones were decimated. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of Jagdgeschwader II, one of the only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day, reported that the sky belonged completely to the Americans. Thunderbolts were stacked from sea level to 30,000 feet. We tried to break through at dawn, 12 fighters from our group. I was the only one to return. The P-47s were waiting at every altitude. You couldn't climb over them, couldn't dive under them. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain. In the weeks following D-Day, P-47s systematically destroyed German movement in daylight. The statistics were staggering. In June alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives, 3,847 trucks, 512 tanks and armored vehicles, and 4,553 horse-drawn vehicles destroyed. The Wehrmacht was forced to move only at night, severely hampering its ability to respond to Allied advances and turning every daylight road into a death trap. The Germans tried everything: reinforced vehicle armor, increased anti-aircraft guns, new camouflage, but the P-47's combination of speed, armor, and overwhelming firepower made them nearly unstoppable. Even the feared 88mm flak gun struggled to track the fast-moving fighters at low altitude. While devastating Europe, the P-47 was simultaneously proving its worth in the Pacific theater. The 348th Fighter Group, operating from New Guinea, discovered that the Thunderbolt's qualities, long range with drop tanks, high-altitude performance, and durability, were perfectly suited to the vast distances and harsh conditions of the Pacific War. The Japanese, accustomed to fighting nimble but fragile American fighters, were unprepared for the P-47's combination of firepower and durability. Japanese ace Saburo Sabai, who encountered P-47s over New Guinea, later wrote, "We called them monsters." Our 20mm cannon, which could destroy a P-40 with a few hits, seemed to have no effect. I put dozens of rounds into one Thunderbolt and watched it fly away. Their return fire was terrifying, streams of heavy bullets that tore aircraft apart. The P-47N variant, developed specifically for the Pacific with extended fuel capacity, would eventually escort B-29s all the way to Japan, proving that the short-legged fighter of 1943 had evolved into a true long-range weapon system capable of global reach. The ultimate vindication of the P-47's evolution came in its encounters with the German jet fighters. The Messerschmitt Me-262, with its 540 miles per hour top speed, should have been untouchable by propeller-driven fighters. But Thunderbolt pilots discovered they could catch the jets in 2 situations: during takeoff and landing when jets were most vulnerable, and in high-speed dives from altitude. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group became one of the first pilots to shoot down an Me-262 with a P-47, using the diving speed advantage to match the jet in level flight. The German pilot, confident in his speed, never saw the diving P-47 until Meyer's guns opened up, disintegrating the jet in a sudden, overwhelming blast of concentrated fire.
By early 1945, specialized P-47M variants were deployed specifically to counter German jets and the V-1 flying bombs. With water methanol injection boosting the massive double WASP engine's power to 2,800 horsepower and refined aerodynamics, these ultimate Thunderbolts could reach 470 miles per hour in level flight at 30,000 feet. They were fast enough to intercept even the jet-propelled Me-262s under certain conditions. Major George Bostwick, commanding the 63rd Fighter Squadron equipped with P-47s, shot down 2 Me-262s in March 1945. His tactical report emphasized firepower over speed. "The jets are faster, but they can't turn, and they can't take punishment. One good burst from our battery and they come apart like they're made of paper. They have to slow down to attack bombers. That's when we get them." The concentrated, overwhelming fire of the 8.50 caliber guns proved more effective against the lightly armored jet aircraft than was anticipated. The ultimate demonstration of American industrial might came during Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's desperate, final attempt to destroy Allied air power on January 1, 1945. Nearly 900 German fighters, including their best remaining pilots and irreplaceable instructors, launched surprise attacks on Allied airfields across Belgium and the Netherlands. At Y-34 airfield near Metz, home to the 365th Fighter Group's P-47s, the attack initially succeeded. German fighters destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground along with several other aircraft. A captured German pilot brought to the command post pointed at the burning aircraft and taunted, "What do you think of that?" Major George Brooking's response became legendary throughout the 9th Air Force, perfectly encapsulating the new reality of the air war. He pointed to the flight line where ground crews were already pushing damaged aircraft aside and preparing hard stands for replacements. "By tomorrow," Brooking said, "we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The German pilot's smirk disappeared. Within 48 hours, factory-fresh P-47 D-40S filled the flight line, flown in from depots in England. The Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and 213 pilots in Bodenplatte, including many irreplaceable instructors and squadron leaders. These losses they could never replace. The Americans lost 134 aircraft total across all attacked airfields, all replaced within a week. The numbers told the story of inevitable defeat. Republic Aviation produced 15,683 P-47s during the war, more than any other American fighter. At peak production, the Farmingdale factory on Long Island completed 1 Thunderbolt every hour around the clock. The Evansville plant in Indiana, built from empty farmland in 1942, was producing 500 aircraft per month by 1944. Each P-47D required 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of electrical wiring, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, and 300 pounds of rubber. The engine alone contained 2,400 individual components machined to tolerances of thousandths of an inch. Yet, American workers, many of them women who had never seen an aircraft before Pearl Harbor, assembled these complex machines with a precision that exceeded peacetime standards. The ammunition production was equally staggering. Each P-47 sortie required 3,400 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition, and with hundreds of Thunderbolts flying daily missions, consumption exceeded 10 million rounds per month by mid-1944. The Lake City Arsenal in Missouri, one of several ammunition plants, produced 30 million rounds monthly. Each cartridge was manufactured to minute tolerances, ensuring reliable feeding through the synchronized gun mechanisms. The fuel consumption was enormous. Each Thunderbolt burned 100 gallons per hour in normal flight.
The 9th Air Force alone consumed over 25 million gallons of aviation fuel monthly by late 1944. All of it shipped across the Atlantic in tankers that were themselves products of American mass production.
Even more impressive than aircraft production was pilot training. By 1944, the United States was graduating 30,000 pilots annually from advanced training, more than Germany had trained in the entire war. Each P-47 pilot received a minimum of 400 hours of flight training before entering combat. German pilots, by contrast, were entering combat with less than 100 hours of total time by war's end. The quality showed in combat. American pilots arrived in Europe trained in formation flying, instrument navigation, gunnery, and tactics. They had practiced against captured German aircraft, understanding their enemy's capabilities and limitations. In March 1945, Oberstleutnant Josef Priller, the same pilot who had mocked the P-47s as pregnant cows 2 years earlier, was interviewed by German propaganda officials seeking to boost morale. His statement, deemed too demoralizing for publication, revealed the complete transformation in German attitudes. The Thunderbolt is the best fighter bomber ever built. Its firepower is unprecedented. Weapons that never jam, never overheat, never run out of ammunition in normal combat. It carries bombs like a medium bomber, fires rockets like artillery, and fights like a fighter when needed. He continued, providing the ultimate verdict on the war of production. But beyond the machine is what it represents: unlimited American production. They lose 10, they build 20. We lose 1, it's gone forever. Their pilots arrive better trained than our instructors. They have fuel for training, ammunition for practice, spare parts for everything. We have nothing but courage. And courage without resources is just delayed defeat. We laughed at them in 1943. We are not laughing now. When you hear those guns, you know death has come calling. The sound haunts us. Mechanical, precise, unstoppable. Like everything American, it's about overwhelming material superiority. They didn't beat us through better tactics or braver pilots. They buried us under an avalanche of steel and lead. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the dinosaur from Farmingdale, was the material hammer that shattered the Luftwaffe. It was not the most agile, nor the sleekest, but it was the most durable, the most heavily armed, and above all, the most numerous. The P-47 was the physical embodiment of America's manufacturing might, proving once and for all that in the skies of total war, industrial logic and overwhelming abundance would always defeat tactical brilliance.